Good afternoon, everyone, and welcome to this latest version of our family Zoom meetings. I am so honored today to introduce Dr. Mandy Rispoli, who is going to be speaking about preventing challenging behavior at home. She's a professor of special education at Purdue University and is someone who cares deeply about children. She's a BCBA. She has strong expertise in behavior, early childhood, research. The list could go on, and I'm very honored to call her a friend and a colleague. So Mandy, I'm going to turn it over to you.
Thank you, Kathy. Welcome, everyone. Thanks for taking time out of your busy day and this busy time of year to be here. I'm Mandy Rispoli, as Kathy said, and I'll be talking a little bit about how to support appropriate behavior and prevent challenging behavior at home. So when we talk about challenging behavior, when I say challenging behavior, I'm talking about any behavior that interferes with learning, any behavior that interferes with completing home routines, any behavior that can interfere with maintaining or building positive relationships with others. Maybe that's peers, maybe it's siblings, maybe it's other adult family members, and any behavior that poses a risk to the child or to others in the environment. So there may be some behaviors that some individuals consider challenging behaviors and other individuals don't. But these are kind of the guidelines that I use when thinking about whether or not a behavior is challenging. And it's important to also know that challenging behavior happens to all of us. We all engage in challenging behavior at times as well. Challenging behavior is a typical part of child development, particularly in younger children, and then again in early adolescence again. And that's all very normal and typical. But sometimes children need additional supports to help them move past those challenging behaviors and to help them use more appropriate behaviors to get their wants and needs met. And it can be frustrating. It can make us feel lonely. It can make us feel helpless when our children do engage in challenging behavior. And so I just want to take a moment to acknowledge those feelings, to let you know that those feelings are also very normal, and that's not a reason to beat yourself up or to stop, but just to acknowledge those feelings and then to think about solutions or paths forward. So really what I'm going to try to do today is help change your perspective around challenging behavior. And we're going to focus on ways to prevent challenging behavior from happening in the first place. We're going to talk about ways to teach new skills, particularly communication skills, to replace challenging behavior. And we're going to talk about how to respond to your child so that appropriate behavior grows and challenging behavior decreases. So one thing I think is really important to just start off with is to recognize the relationship between social communication skills and challenging behavior. So when an individual has a lot of social skills, it can interact with others, it can recognize their emotions, they can recognize emotions in others, they can navigate different interactions or problems with other people. When they have strong communication skills, we're going to see a decrease in the likelihood that they engage in challenging behavior because they have all of these other tools to get their wants and needs met. For children who struggle with social interactions or struggle with some social skills or have needs in the area of communication, they don't have those skills to fall back on to get their wants and needs met. So they use what they do have, which tends to be their bodies, right? Challenging behavior. And so the number one way that we can reduce challenging behavior is to actually teach social, emotional, and communication skills to young kids and throughout the lifespan, actually. So the number one way to prevent challenging behavior is to boost those other skill areas in social communication. So I'm going to start again by thinking about ways to prevent challenging behavior before it happens, because that's the best way to handle problem behavior is to just eliminate it in the first place. And so I'm going to focus on two different areas or strategies for preventing challenging behavior. And again, these strategies are to be used before challenging behavior even starts, right? Before your child has a tantrum or a meltdown or engages in challenging behavior, we're using these strategies to prevent those behaviors before they even take place. And so the two prevention strategies that I'm going to talk about today are visual activity schedules and choice. So visual activity schedules are a way to take something that's very abstract, like time, that might be unpredictable, and make it really concrete, right? So we use the mantra, when in doubt, write it out. So we take something that's really abstract and we turn it into something that's tangible, that's visual, that can capture some of the strengths that our kids with autism might have. And so a visual activity schedule takes this idea of our routine or the activities we have to engage in, and it puts it into a really visual, logical sequence so that the child can actually see what's going to happen throughout their day. They can see the expectations that people have of their behaviors also in those different contexts. So a visual activity schedule is visual, so it's something that's clearly displayed. It should be matched to your child's understanding of symbolism, and I'll talk to you about that in a moment. Oftentimes I'll go into classrooms and all of the visual activity schedules look just the same for all the children, which makes me a little nervous because my guess is not all of those children are understanding symbolism at the same level. So we want a visual support or visual activity schedule that's going to be matched to your child's level of understanding. We also want a visual activity schedule that's interactive. So when individuals can take something off that they've already completed, put the next activity on, right? So when we can interact with those schedules, they become even more concrete and more powerful teaching tool. Visual activity schedules are helpful if we actually follow them, right? So they're not new wall art, but they are supposed to be used. So the child and the caregiver are interacting with that schedule. They're actually following what's on the schedule throughout the day so that that schedule begins to have some meaning in the child's life. But we also know that things change. And so you may have a schedule and something else happens and all of a sudden your schedule changes. That's a great teaching moment, particularly for kids with autism who may struggle with things that require flexibility. So we can actually program in opportunities to have changes in our schedule, right? So today we usually ride the bus to school. Today we're going to drive in the car, right? There's an opportunity to practice a new activity in that schedule. And you can have schedules for home, you can have schedules for school, you could have schedules for going out into the community. So if you're going to the grocery store, maybe you have a schedule for first we're going to get the grocery cart, then we're going to go to produce, then we're going to go to dairy, and then at the very end, we'll go to the cereal aisle or the treat aisle, whatever your child's most preferred aisle is. So when I talked about making sure that the schedule matches your child's level of understanding, what I'm talking about is making sure that they know what that item on the schedule represents. So we begin with real objects. So if you have a child in your home who may not be ready for symbolism through pictures or through text, we might begin with the actual object itself. So if it's time for a diaper change, the schedule is handing the child a diaper. If it's time for breakfast, the schedule is handing your child the sippy cup for breakfast. So we start with objects. If your child's able to move past objects, the next level of symbolism is photographs. And these are photographs of your family, your routines, the materials in your house, so that there's not much of a stretch between holding the object and then seeing the object through this photograph. So perhaps you want to have a visual schedule for mealtime, right? So step one, we wash our hands, and then we have a picture of the actual sink where your child should wash their hands before meal. Step two, we sit at the table. You'll have a picture of the child's actual chair and your actual table where they sit to eat their meals, if you sit to eat meals. Step three is we eat our food, right? And so maybe you have a picture of your child eating. Okay? So the next level after objects is actual photographs within your home using your materials and people. If your child is ready to move past that, the next level of symbolism are colored line drawings. And so this is a little more abstract. So this is a different image that's supposed to represent the activity in your home. So if your child is having a hard time understanding these images, you may want to match them back to the photographs, right? So the child practices matching the colored line drawing to the photograph of that activity. So they begin to associate those together. If your child's rocking and rolling with colored line drawings, that's great. Maybe it's time to move to black and white line drawings, and then ultimately to written text. Sometimes visual activity schedules might be overwhelming, especially if we put everything out we have to do. I don't know if you all use visual schedules, but I use Google Calendar all the time. And if I look at my whole week in Google Calendar, I begin to shut down. So for me, I just need small windows, and your child may be like me as well. So instead of a whole activity schedule, maybe we identify 2 activities and we just present 2 at a time. Sometimes that's called a first then schedule. So first we're going to do this, and then we're going to do this next thing. And then we can put another first and another then after that. So a first then schedule helps your child understand that after they complete this thing, and sometimes it's a thing they don't really want to complete, then something really fun happens. So it helps them know that the good things are coming. And after I complete this, I'll get access to the things that I really like. So first, maybe I have to get my clothes on in the morning, but then I get to eat my very favorite cereal for breakfast. Okay? Or first I need to go to the bathroom, and then I get to watch my favorite video. So first thens can be used to just break down a schedule into smaller pieces, or it can be used to help children understand that good things happen after they complete this not so great activity. So here's an example of a first then using photographs. First, wash your hands, and then you can have a snack. And again, when we use Velcro, when we're able to have the child interact with the object, maybe you're using digital schedules and they can tap it and drag it or swipe it. Any way they can interact with the schedule is helpful. So I want you to just think for a moment about your child or the child that you're supporting, and what level of symbolism do you think your child might be ready for? And if you're not sure, try it out and see how they do. And maybe you have to step back, or maybe you get to jump ahead a little bit. So just think for a second about what level of symbolism your child would be ready for right now for a visual schedule. And then think about what activities you might want to put on that schedule. So maybe your child tends to have challenging behavior in the morning before school. A visual activity schedule for that morning routine could help make that routine a little bit more predictable and a little bit more concrete. Maybe your child has a lot of trouble with challenging behavior in the evenings around bedtime. So what activities might you put on the schedule at that time? Maybe you're not really sure when your child's having challenging behavior. It seems to kind of be sporadic throughout the day, and you want a whole day schedule. So thinking about the symbolism, thinking about what activities you're going to put on your schedule, and then thinking about how you might initially teach your child to use that schedule. And so I advocate for what we call most to least, which is you're modeling, you're helping the child complete the schedule with the most amount of support. And then you slowly back off until your child can take the picture and put it into the finished bucket and figure out what's next on their schedule, or swipe the icon over to the finished folder if you're using an app. So we provide the most amount of support, and then we step back to see if the child's able to take on a little bit more of an active role until eventually they're doing it all by themselves. And then think about how you could actually make this visual activity schedule. So there's no magic software that you have to use to make a visual activity schedule. You could do photographs with your own camera. You can do Google Images and just search for pictures and print them out. If you have other staff who help support your child and your family, you can also ask them to help make some visual supports for you, some visual activity schedules. So those are kind of the next steps in terms of making visual activity schedules a useful tool in your homes. The next prevention strategy I want to talk about is choice. And so choice is one of my very favorite interventions because it gives the individual with autism more power, more control in their own daily life. So oftentimes we, the adults or the caregivers, are making all the decisions for people with autism. And I don't know about you, but I would probably get pretty frustrated pretty quickly if someone else was making all the decisions in my life. So choice allows an opportunity for the individual to make some own choices within some safe parameters. So when you're first teaching choice making, I recommend using just an array of 2. So 2 choices, this or that. And I also recommend making it visual. Remember, when in doubt, write it out. And so maybe it's time to go to bed, and you can help your child have a choice of which step in the routine they want to do first. So part of our bedtime routine is taking the bath. Part of our bedtime routine is brushing our teeth. Which one would you like to do first? Okay, there's an opportunity for choice. They're still getting ready for bed, but they have some more say in the process. Sometimes we don't have an option to help them choose which activity to complete in a sequence, but we can ask them how they would like to complete that activity. So if it's teeth brushing time, no matter what, maybe they get to decide if they want to use the electric toothbrush or the manual toothbrush, or the bubblegum flavored toothpaste or the mint flavored toothpaste. So we can provide choices across activities, and we can also provide choices within an activity. What we found is that it's actually the choice making itself that makes this intervention powerful, not what the child is selecting. So even when we have two terrible choices, right? Two things the child doesn't like, their challenging behavior decreases just by getting the chance to choose one of those things. So choice is a really helpful intervention. And again, I recommend starting very concrete. So having visuals, maybe it's an object, again, if that's the level of symbolism for the child in your life. Maybe it's pictures, it could even be text. So here are some tools that we've developed to help think through the choice-making process. So again, there's two types of choice-making. One is across activity, and one is within activity. So across activity helps us to understand which activity we're going to complete in a sequence. So, first brush your teeth, then take a bath, then get your jammies on, then go to bed. Versus within activity is how we're going to complete that task. And so in terms of within activity choice, you can think about what materials the child might use to complete the task. You could think about where they complete the task. Do they have to eat dinner at the table? Could they eat dinner on a TV tray? Could they eat dinner on the couch? Maybe it's important that your child eats dinner at a certain spot, but they get to choose which plate they're using. So maybe location's not an option for you, but materials might be. Maybe there's some other factors like who they want to sit next to while they're eating their meal. So we can provide a lot of choice within activities. So again, just reviewing, best way to address challenging behavior is to prevent it from happening in the first place. And two powerful prevention strategies are both visual. One are visual activity schedules, and the other is choice, making use of those visuals to help make the choice a little bit more concrete. Even with the best prevention strategies, we may also want to make sure that we're teaching social and emotional and communication skills. And so let's talk about one teaching strategy that we might use to help teach some of those social communication skills. So as again, I showed you that seesaw, when challenging behavior is more likely to occur, social communication skills are less likely to occur. So there's this link between problem behavior or challenging behavior and communication. In fact, challenging behavior is communication. So our kids are telling us what they want, they're telling us what they don't want, they're just using challenging behavior to help get that message across. And there are two main things that your child is communicating to you all the time. These are the two things that all of us communicate all the time. We want something, maybe it's information, which is why you came here today. Maybe it's support to connect with other people, which is why you came here today. Or we want to get away from something, right? So if you're like me, your alarm goes off in the morning. It's so dark now in the morning. It's so cold. It feels so good under those blankets. And so I want to get away from getting out of bed. So I'll turn off my alarm, right? I'm communicating, I don't want that right now. So we all want something, or we want to get away from something. And if we have good social and communication skills, we can communicate that really effectively and appropriately. And if we don't, we're going to communicate that, but it might be with challenging behaviors. So how do you know what your child is communicating through their behavior? You are the experts on your child. You know what your child's wants are, you know what they're asking for most of the time. You are their number one advocates and experts. But it can be hard sometimes to recognize what is happening right here. These challenging behaviors are so frustrating, it's so difficult to figure out why they're happening, when they might happen again. And so one way that we can start to make sense of what the child is communicating or the individual is communicating is by looking at patterns in their behavior. So what tends to happen right before challenging behavior that might be creating an opportunity for them to communicate if they want something or they don't want something? And what's happening right after their challenging behavior that's telling them, hey, that worked out, I'm going to do that again to get what I want. Or man, that didn't work out so well, I'm going to try something different to get what it is that I want or what I want to get away from. So we just start looking at patterns, and this can take a while before we can recognize those things that happen right before a behavior and those things that happen right after a behavior. So here's an example. Maybe the thing that tends to happen right before the challenging behavior is the parent says, okay, it's time for bed. And then that triggers the child to cry or to run away, which leads to this epic game of chase where the child actually ends up going to bed 30 minutes later. So in this situation, the child might be communicating, I don't want to go to bed. I'd like to stay up, right? I want to get access to staying up. I want to avoid going to bed. Maybe your child is screaming and hitting and grabbing at tablets or other electronic devices. And you notice that right before he does that, it's usually when the tablet or the device is taken away. Then he screams, hits, grabs the tablet, and then maybe dad gives him back the tablet. Okay? In this case, the child might be communicating, hey, I want access to that tablet again. Maybe mom walks away and the child chases after mom and cries, and then mom picks up the child. Maybe in this situation, the child's communicating, I want mom. Right? So we can look at patterns of things that are happening before the behavior and patterns of things that are happening after the behavior to help us figure out what the individual is communicating. So one way that we can use this information for teaching is to say, all right, here's the message that this child has for us, and here's a better way to deliver that very same message. So we give them a better way to communicate, I'd like the tablet, or I don't want to go to bed, or I want mom. So this is where we make challenging behavior less effective. It doesn't work as well, and good communication skills more effective. This is what I'm going to do to get those great things that I want to get access to or that I want to avoid. So we start by saying, again, what is the child communicating? What might be a better way to communicate that? And then we teach the child that new communication skill. And that new communication skill should be easier to use than the challenging behavior. If it's more work, then the child is going to keep using their challenging behavior because that was easier and it worked pretty effectively. So we want this new communication skill to be easier than the problem behavior. Sometimes when I get really flustered or upset or frustrated, it can be difficult for me to recall the words I want to use in a nice, calm, and elegant manner, right? And I have pretty fluent language skills. So for a child who might struggle with communication and you add frustration or anxiety or general feelings of upset, it can be even harder for them to retrieve those words. So when we think about a new communication skill, you might want to think about other modes or forms that that communication could have. So maybe in addition to using words, I have a visual that I can either hand a picture over to somebody or press a button on my iPad or my speech generating device. Maybe I use a gesture or a manual sign along with my oral language. That way I'm communicating effectively even when words are hard for me to find. So some things we might want to might teach a child to communicate instead of problem behavior. If they're trying to get access to your attention, if that's what you figure out is that they're communicating they want access to attention, maybe you teach them to say, play with me, or come here, or I want mom. Maybe you give them other modes to do that. So maybe it's a picture card that says, play with me, or maybe it's a gesture that says, hey, over here, come talk to me. If they want an object or an activity, teach them to ask for that specific object or specific activity. So teaching them the name of the object, I want tablet, or teaching them the name of the activity, I want to go outside. Right? When we teach specific names of things, then we can also help boost language and communication. And then maybe they want to get away from something. So it's appropriate to reject things. We reject things all the time. We say, no, thank you, or I don't want to do that, or I'm not interested in going, or maybe another time. Right? We always are rejecting all day long. And yet when we talk about kids with disabilities, oftentimes we don't teach those appropriate rejection skills. So here's some ways that you can teach your child to appropriately reject, right? They might say, I don't like that, or please stop, or no, thank you, or can I have a break? Or maybe this is hard and I need some help if I'm going to do this task. So those are some example communication skills you could teach based on what the child's communicating, but it's really up to you to think about what form that communication is going to take and what length or what words you're going to use in that communicative response and that new way to ask for the same thing as their challenging behavior. And again, you can use a lot of different forms for this. So even if your child uses language to communicate, it doesn't mean that they use language well or that it's easy for them when they're upset. Maybe your child doesn't use language to communicate yet. And so you're looking at other systems to help them communicate. So these new communication forms need to be easier than the challenging behavior. They might include voice, they might include manual sign, maybe you have a communication board, maybe you have a picture card or word on a card, maybe you have speech generating or voice output systems or apps, or maybe you just use less formal gestures. So again, think about your child, think about their strengths, and pick a form of communication that's going to be successful for them. And it needs to be easier than the challenging behavior. So the old way, maybe you asked your child to leave toys, they could go take a bath, they throw the toys, they run away, and the bath is delayed. So the new way might be you ask the child to leave the toys to go take a bath, and maybe they sign more, or maybe they ask for play, or maybe they say in 5 minutes, right? Whatever the message is that you want them to communicate. And then they get that very same consequence of the bath is delayed. So we start by teaching them a new way to communicate, and it works just as well as their challenging behavior. And then over time, we can slowly increase expectations. Okay, you can have 3 more minutes, but when the timer goes off, then we're going to take a bath. Or let's do this one more activity and then you can have a break. Okay, so we can slowly build in additional expectations over time. But the first step is to replace that problem behavior, that challenging behavior, with communication. So again, what's the child saying with their challenging behavior? What's a new, better way to say that? How can I help my child use this new way? Am I making sure that this new way works? Because if it doesn't work, they're going to go right back to challenging behavior. And am I making sure that challenging behavior does not work as well as this new way? So that gets us into responding. So the last thing I want to talk about today is how do you respond to your child's behavior? So if your child's engaged in inappropriate behavior, we want to make sure that they continue to do that. And so it's important to recognize that, acknowledge it, and reward it. So we can do that by providing praise, so telling the child exactly what they did well so they know what to do again in the future. We can do that by giving them access to things that they really enjoy, so they're more likely to engage in that appropriate behavior in the future. And we can avoid giving them things that they don't like, right? So that's that rejection behavior. If they're asking nicely not to do something, then we're going to reward them by not making them do that thing that they don't want to do. So we use rewards or we respond in a way to increase behavior when your child uses a new appropriate behavior, so a new way to communicate or ask for what they want. Your child's communicating in a way that is appropriate. So maybe it's not replacing problem behavior, but it's still a good way to communicate. And your child's not using challenging behavior to get what they want. So types of rewards, or sometimes we call these reinforcers. So anything that's going to help a behavior keep going in the future might be attention. So if your child really likes attention, if they're asking for attention through their problem behavior, then giving them high quality attention when they don't have problem behavior can be a really helpful way to respond to them. Maybe they really like preferred activities, and this doesn't have to be an object. This could be physical activity like going for a walk, or snuggling, or going out to get ice cream, or going to the playground. Maybe they are really motivated by things, and so giving them access to their very favorite toy or a tablet or other tangible objects. We can use that as a reward for appropriate behavior, and giving them breaks from things they don't want to do. We can also use that as a reward for appropriate behavior. So when you're thinking about what rewards or reinforcers to use, think about, what does your child enjoy? What do they like to do? And then how can you program that so they get access to that when they have appropriate behavior, and they don't get access to that when they have challenging behaviors? We can also reinforce or reward appropriate behavior using what's called behavior-specific praise. So this is where we tell the child exactly what it was that they did well. So we say, you are sitting at the table, that tells me you're ready to eat, and we provide that preferred food. So when we use really specific language, it helps the child know what they did well so that they're not guessing, right? When we use big words like great job or way to go, the child may not know exactly what it was that they did that was successful. Maybe you say, you said no, thank you. Good job telling me calmly. You don't have to put your shoes on right now. Okay? And when we're providing that behavior specific praise, we want to do it in an authentic way so that they believe us. We want to have energy and we want to have excitement, right? We want to really reward that appropriate behavior. So we give more attention, more reward to behaviors we want to see, and we give less attention, less reward to behaviors that we don't want to see. So in summary, behavior is communication, and we can do 3 things to reduce that behavior. We can prevent it in the first place using visual schedules and choice making. We can teach new ways to communicate. So what is your child communicating, and giving them a better way to communicate that very same message. And we can respond to their behavior. We respond to appropriate behavior using behavior specific praise, giving them access to what it is that they wanted, that they're not using challenging behavior to get anymore. And we can limit our response to challenging behavior. So we give more attention to the behaviors we want to see continue in the future. This is my email address, and I know we have some time for questions. If we don't get to your question, or if you are watching this later and you want to ask something, you can always reach out to me here. Great, thanks everybody.